Hello everyone. Let's proceed on to the next chapter of NCERT Class 11 Economics, and the name of the chapter is Indian Economy from 1950 to 1990. So when India finally woken up to the new dawn of freedom on 15 August 1947, we had to find an economic system that could lift us out of the misery we were in. A system that could equalize, that could make even all the exploitation that has been done by the British. So in the earliest instance, it was the socialism that appealed to the first prime minister, but he was not in favor of the socialism that prevailed in former Soviet Union. And the socialism of Soviet Union, herein all the means of production, factories, farms, they were owned by the government. So let's brief about socialism. Socialism is an ideology in which um, the target is society rather than an individual. So the needs, the welfare, the benefit, what to produce, how many to produce, and the ills and benefits all are looked up at the primary unit, that is society. So in case of socialism, individual needs are generally ignored, which is not the case in capitalism. And so this ideology itself, it is simple, but then on the state level, it has taken a turn in which for the benefit and for the welfare of society, the state or the government, it has nationalized all the means of production. So in case of former Soviet Union, all means of production, factories, farms were owned by the government. And but Nehru and other leaders, they were not in favor of this mechanism or this organization. They also wanted to give a place to mm, private property or the private entrepreneurship. So they devised a middle way in which extreme versions of both capitalism and socialism were avoided, and we found a middle ground by which we we brought the best of both the system from both socialism and capitalism, and made ourselves either socialist capitalism or capitalism capitalist socialism. So that was the middle way that we had found, which was mix of both the system, both socialism and capitalism. So we devised that India would be a socialist society with a strong public sector, but also private property and democracy. Now let's talk about the type of economic system. So in order to know what are the different types of economic systems are there, we need to answer three basic questions. First one is, what goods and services should be produced in a country? The second question, how should the goods and service be produced? Should producers use more human labor or more capital? So either is it going to be labor intensive or capital intensive? And third one is, how should the goods and services be distributed among the people? So the answer to these questions, it depends on the market forces of supply and demand. So in a market economy or in a capitalist economy, also called capitalism, only those consumer goods will be produced, those are in demand and those can be afforded by people. So example is given here. If cars are in demand, cars will be produced, and if bicycles are in demand, bicycle will be produced. So if the labor is cheaper than capital, then more labor intensive means of production will be used. So in a capitalist society, goods produced are distributed among people not on the basis of what people need, but on the basis of what people can afford. So capitalist society, it has answered all the three questions. So for the first, what goods and services should be produced in the country? Those that are in demand. Second, how should the goods and services be produced? So it depends on which one is cheaper, so that it will be cost effective, and because of cost effectiveness, profits will be generated. So the primary mover here is profits. Now the second one, it has been answered, whichever is cheaper, if it is labor or capital. Both venues can be used, depends on the cost effectiveness. And the third one, how should the goods and services be distributed? So this distribution, it does not depend on what people need, but what people can afford. So it is based on the purchasing capacity of people. And examples, if a sick person will be able to use the required medicine only if he or she can afford to buy it. And we have seen these instances during COVID-19 pandemic, when every oxygen cylinder, which which is usually around $1,000, it was sold to around 400,000. So this is one of the ills of capitalist society. Okay, that during the urgent time, during the emergencies, medical emergencies especially, it is the rich, it is people who can afford, only they can survive in such a system. If you cannot afford it, we are not, or the capitalism or the market economy, it does not have any answer to it. And if they cannot afford the medicine, they will not be able to use it, even if they need it urgently. So capitalism, it is said that it is heartless society, and we have seen its ugly face during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it did not appeal to Jawaharlal Nehru, our first prime minister, that it was because he knew that great majority of people of country at that time, they were so poor that they cannot afford 2 meals a day. So how are they going to afford the capital treatment? Then comes the socialist society, and now all the three questions. So first one is, in a socialist society, it is the government that decides what goods are to be produced in accordance with what society needs. Then the answer of second question is, it is the government again who decides how goods are to be produced and how they should be distributed. So the answer of second and third question have also been given. But distribution under socialism, it is supposed to be based on what people need in general. The target unit, it is society. So socialism, it decides what society needs in general. So individual needs or affordability, the purchasing parity, these are not looked into. That's why a socialist nation, it provides free healthcare to citizens. And in a strict sense, a socialist society, there is no room for private property, since everything is owned by the state. Then again, we decided to avoid both the extremes of both capitalism and socialism. And not only us, but most Democracies, most modern nations, they avoid the extremes and resort to mixed economic model in which the government and the market, the private sector, both work together in tandem. So in a mixed economy, the market it will provide whatever goods or service it can produce well, and the government will provide essential services which market fails to do or market will not find it profitable to do so. Then proceeding to what is a plan. So a plan spells out how the resources of a nation should be put to use. And to put resources to use, a nation it needs to have some goals or objective in mind. And those goals they are to be achieved in specified period of time. So India, we adopted the 5-year plan of former Soviet Union, and our plan document it not only specified the objective to be attained in 5 years, but what is to be achieved over a period of 20 years. That is a perspective plan. So we provide both 5-year and 5-year plan and perspective plan together. And then it's just another few more trivials about how plan makes sense. Let's talk about the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948 and Directive Principle of State Policy of Indian Constitution. They reflected mixed economic model. So in 1950, the Planning Commission was set up with Prime Minister as its chairperson. The basic goals of 5-year plan, these are growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. And nevertheless, the planners they have to ensure that as far as possible the policies of plans do not contradict these four goals. So our 5-year plan, and then even after the 5-year mechanism it has been almost abolished, we are still sticking to these four goals. The first goal, growth. So it refers to increase in the country's capacity to produce the output of goods and service. And a good indicator of economic growth is GDP, gross domestic product. GDP is the market value of all the goods and services produced in the country during a year. GDP, gross domestic product. So it is the monetary value of final goods and service produced in a country in a year. So let's say this is a country and it is inhabited by four people A, B, C, and D. So A is a farmer, B is a teacher, C is a tool maker, and D is a trader. So here four economic activities are being undertaken by the inhabitant of this country, and this circle it is the geographical boundary of this particular country. There is economic activities. Now the GDP of this country it will be the monetary value of all the economic activities undertaken by these four people. So let's say farmer, he has produced around 100 kg of food grain, and the food grain, it is valued at 30 rupees. So all in all, the monetary evaluation of his economic activity, it is 3000 for a year. Now let's take the example of second person, teacher. So teacher, in the same way, he is earning around 5000. Next comes C, tool maker. So he is making 50 tools, and each of his tool, it is valued around 100 rupees. So he is earning 5000 per year. And now comes the trader. So let's say he is trading the goods and services of all the three, and out of the total profit, he has managed to secure 7000 per year. Now the GDP calculation, it will be monetary sum of all the activities, of all activity in a particular year. So the monetary value, it will be 3k plus 5k plus 5k plus 7k. Then it will be total 20k. So GDP of this country, which is inhabited by four people, this fictitious country, it is 20k. This is the calculation of GDP. Now the GDP of a country, it is derived from different sectors, and those sectors, agriculture, industrial and services sector. And the contribution made by each of these sectors makes the structural composition of the country. So here in this particular example, so A belongs to agriculture sector, B belongs to services, C belongs to manufacturing, and D belongs to services. So the structural composition of this fictitious country, it is agriculture 1, manufacturing 1, and services 2. So this is the structural composition, and these can be primary activities, can be called primary activity or agriculture and allied activity. Second one is manufacturing or industrial sector, and third one is service sector. Now let's talk about Mahalanobis before proceeding on to the second factor. So Mahalanobis is known as the architect of Indian planning. Planning in the real sense, it started with second 5-year plan, in which had contribution of PC Mahalanobis. The second plan, a landmark contribution to developing planning in general, it laid down the basic ideas regarding goals of Indian planning, and these ideas were organized by Mahalanobis. And rest of the contributions, they will not be much help to the UPSC Civil Services examination. This is just to know that the contribution of second plan, it was done by Mahalanobis. Then this particular box, it it can become a question in prelims as well as in mains, which is um a structural anomaly in Indian economy. So generally, it happens that countries they progress from bottom-up method, in which first most of their inhabitants, they are engaged in agriculture and allied activity. Then they proceed on to the industrial sector, and much of the agricultural workforce it is absorbed by the industrial forces. So yeah, this gives agriculture much needed space, and with that breathing space, when most of the people they have been absorbed into industrial sector, agriculture is also given further improvement in terms of irrigation and other facilities. Then the industrial sector it prospers, and excess of industrial sector it is absorbed by service sector. So it can be a series of steps that are generally undertaken by different nations on their growth trajectories, and this is known as structural change. But the Indian case, it speaks of a peculiar and anomalous structural change, because usually with development the share of agriculture it declines and share of industry it becomes dominant. So it's a bottom up journey, and at high levels of development, when the excess workforce it migrates to and shifts towards service sector, which contributes more than the other two sectors. So in India, the share of agriculture in GDP it was more than 50%. Well, that can be expected for a poor country. But by 1990s, after the liberalization LPG reforms, the share of service sector it has risen up to 40.959%. Right now it's around 50%. So the service sector it has risen up to this particular threshold, 50% contribution, bypassing the middle step, which is the industrial sector, which is the which is anomalous or peculiar here in case of India. Now let's talk about the second factor, that is modernization. So to increase the production of goods and services, any country it has to adopt new technology. For example, a farmer, in order to increase the output, may take the help of newer seed varieties. So this adoption of new technology it is called modernization, which also include changes in social outlooks. So a modern society it makes use of talent of women in workplace, in banks, factories, school, etc. So modernization here it is not just adoption of new technology but also change in social outlook. Now the third factor is self-reliance. So a nation can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources or by importing those resources. The first 5-year plan, we gave importance to self-reliance and avoided imports, and that was obvious because we were just freed from the jaws of from the jaws of imperialism, and, and it was like we were being cautious, and that caution was necessary because the jaws of capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, and all such forces, and they are so um, so frightening that if we do not stay vigilant, they can anytime, they are always there to drop us. So we resorted to self-reliance, and it was also considered necessary so that our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food, it uh, could be avoided. It was because when we depend on foreign countries for basic things such as food, we are staking up our sovereignty. We are becoming vulnerable to foreign interference. It's like if we cannot feed our own country, if we have become dependent on other countries for the basic staple, it means our economy, our democracy, our governance, it is failing us, and it becomes a weak spot. And geopolitics, it does not allow such a weak spot to be go unnoticed or unexploited. And we have seen this in LPG reforms. We have seen this in the crisis of Sri Lanka and Pakistan, that if you allow foreign government in in matters of your staples, in your basic matters, they are going to interfere in you. They are going to intervene in your domestic affairs. Then comes the factor of equity, and equity is more about improving the life of people that live. So by equity, we not only means that we are going through high growth, we are consuming modern technology, and we are self-reliant on most of the basic necessities. It also means that most of the people, they are free from poverty, and it is important to ensure that the benefits of economic prosperity, it reach the poor section. And equity here means that every Indian, he should be able to meet at least his basic needs, which are food, decent house, education, healthcare, and inequality in distribution of wealth, that also be reduced. Now let's talk about the first sector, agriculture. So we know the condition in which the British left us, and when it's seen through the eyes of agriculture, just one statistic is enough to speak about um, the situation India was in during the time of independence. So the statistic of famine. So all in all, in the last years of the British rule, there were 121 famines in our country. 121 famines are way too much. And famine is not just a natural disaster. It is an artificial disaster. It is a man-made disaster. So, and the disaster here, the man-made culprit here was the British greed for resources, British greed for exploitation of resources, the British greed for extracting as much revenue as they could from the land and people. So this was the situation they left us in. And many of those famines, they were very lethal. Most of the Indian students, they might hear it from their grandparents about the the great famine of 1899 or 1900. So that was around 124 years ago. And yes, they have followed many such great and lethal famines before and after that one, but still this, especially this one, it was uh, it was remembered by many old people, and it has also transmitted down along the generation through folklores and bedtime stories. So the thing is, so it was the time. Uh, so by Roman calendar, it was 1900, the year when the famine happened. But according to Indian calendar, it was 1956, because Indian calendar it is 56 year ahead of Roman calendar. So it it was Vikram Samvat or Shak Samvat 1956, and that's why it was called Chapniya Akal. Chapniya Akal, and this one was regarded by many of our ancestors and many of the statistical observer to be one of the most drastic, disastrous, and severe famine in our country, in which the scarcity of food grain was almost forgotten. People started eating each other. That was the time, and that was also the time in which such instances happened, such cannibalism or such scarcity, they were elucidated or they were observed in very fertile areas such as Bengal. So Bengal is still considered very fertile area because it is fed by two rivers, two giant rivers, Ganga and Brahmaputra, and it is still one of the many fertile area of of whole world. And to imagine that, mm, the Bengal area at that time during 1900, it could have gone through such a drastic situation. It is almost incredible, unbelievable, but it was thanks to the British. So the situation in which the British left us, it needed to be urgently looked into, and our nationalist leader, they addressed the situation through land reforms. So the land tenure system, it was characterized by intermediaries during the time of independence, and these intermediaries, they were called jamindars or jagirdars. So let's see how the jamindari and jagirdari works. So whoever had the previous lectures, they may know about it. I'll brief about it again. It is, let's divide, let's take the fictitious country again and divide it into four spheres, A, B, C, and D. And now this country, it is governed by a king X. Now king, he has a lot many other courtly or royal responsibilities. So he divided his country into four parts. So for revenue collection and for better of governance, and each of these four parts, it has been divided among the people who are close and loyal to him. So A is his son, B is one of his noble, C is one of his minister, and D is the military commander. So this is how he distributed the whole area into four parts, and now he demanded from from four person to extract this revenue. So the revenue collection or the taxation from land, because king, court, ministers, military, victories, war, they could not happen without taxation. And revenue is one such taxation during ancient time, by which money, it could be levied from people themselves, so that, or in exchange for protection. in exchange for protection, in exchange for better policies, in exchange for governance. So the revenue, it was calculated by many such methods. One such method was that land was measured good, bad, and the middle. So one of the noble or minister or anyone appointed by the king, he would undertake a land measurement survey, and he would elucidate the kind of land held in different corners of the country. And now when taken here that which is generally that 20% is good land, 30% is bad land, and 50% is middle. And now the king, it has arrived that since this is the ratio divided for simplification, so here 33% of revenue. So by one such logic, 30%, I'm not saying that every king or every sultan or every Mughal emperor they undertook the same land measurement that I have suggested. I'm just giving an example that this was how it was usually done, and it was also one of the way land measurement was undertaken. So here 33% was uh, was the revenue that was decided by the surveyor, and the king approved it. So the 33% of revenue, it has to come from four places. So in and the king, let's say a benevolent king who understood the people very well, he brought he approximated to the near zero and made it 30%. So 30% of revenue should be collected from whole country, or 30% from each land. It means every 30% from produce, it should go to the king. Now king ordered the four of the person who has administration and control of the respective areas, each of them. So just say king, he ordered his son A to bring about 30% of revenue that has been finalized, and each of the four person, each of the four area, they have been given the same target, that 30% of revenue needed to be undertaken or levied and appropriated by their respective authorities. Now a son, even if he has this much area under him, at first he alone is not capable of undergoing this exercise, and he has other duties as well. So what he did, he in a way he brought four intermediaries, let's say PQRS. So he divided the land that was held by him among his four intermediaries, and ordered each of them that this much revenue it should go to the king. So here now four intermediaries, those who were held in collection of, or who held the responsibility of collecting royal revenue, they were known as Jamindar or Jagirdar. And now each of them, they had the responsibility to send 30% of the land revenue to the king. Now each of these persons, they had all their land beneath them, below them, or under their control. So all the tilers of the particular area, all the tilers, sharecroppers, and farmers, they reported and assigned their revenue to the Jamindar. So it may be that he usually kept this rate at 31%, so that some of the rate, some of the revenue, uh, he could use it for himself, and the royal revenue it may be sent at around 30%. So let's say he keeps this at 30% as per the royal farman. So he extract 33% revenue, keeps 1% for himself, and send the 32% to the son, to uh, the higher authority. Now son, he keeps 2% and send the 30% to the king. So this was the earlier land revenue system that was undertaken during the ancient times. So, and the same intermediaries, they were employed by the British to collect revenue. So these zamindar, they merely collected rent from actual tillers of the soil without contributing towards improvement on the farm. And because of the low productivity of agriculture sector, it forced India to import food from United States during the 1960s. And it was a very humiliating experience that you needed to borrow food from other countries and you speak of democracy. So land reforms were needed. So land reform means the ownership of land holding, it should change. So earlier, all the land, it were either royal land or land that was granted to various nobles, ministers, Brahmin, priests, or land that was gifted. So after the Sultanate and Mughal period, it was the British that held most of the land. So most of the provinces that were under British, that under direct occupation of British, and various princely states, they were under various royal titles such as king, thakur, etc. So this was the arrangement before independence, and here the ownership of land holding, it needed to change. So first first steps were taken to abolish intermediaries such as the jamindar and jagirdars, and to make the tillers the owner of land. So whoever was tilling the land, whoever was working and growing crops on a land, he was made the owner of the land. This was the idea behind land reforms. Yes, and the idea was that if if tiller or sharecropper or farmer, whoever is working on a land, if he had given the ownership, this would give him the incentive to make improvements in the land, and this would increase the productivity of farm, and productivity of farm, if increased, will definitely lead to increase in the agricultural output, and we can become self-reliant. So before proceeding on to land sealing part of land reform, let's see ownership and incentive, as we talked about during the whole idea of land reform. So the policy of land to the tiller, it is based on the idea that the cultivators, whoever is working on a farm, will take more interest, will have more incentive in increasing output, in increasing the um, productivity of land, in making investment to a land, if they are the owners of the land. So this is like possession or possessiveness. So if possessions are given to someone, that thing will become his personal property, his private property. And in order to uh, make ahead in life, in order to grow in life, this will incentivize him. This giving him the private property will incentivize him to increase the output, to make investment in it. So it is because ownership of land enables tiller to make profit. The idea is that if tiller is made the owner, then the profit that is realized from the increased output, it it will be taken up by the Tyler himself. It is not going to any other intermediaries or the state. So this is the idea. And since tenants who are working on the land, they do not have the incentive to make improvement on lands, because it is the landowner who is going to who is going to concentrate all the profits. They do not have any incentive. And the importance of ownership in providing incentive, it has been well illustrated by the carelessness with which farmers in former Soviet Union used to pack fruits and potatoes for sale. So it was very common sight to see that um, the farmers uh, that used to work in common farms or communes, common potato farms. So all the farms that were owned by the state, owned by the government. So it did not give any individual cultivator any incentive to work with care. All they had to do is to work for a certain amount of time. So it was often seen that they used to pack the rotten and fresh potatoes together. And it is not difficult to know that rotten fruits or rotten potato, they can also spoil the fresh fruits or potatoes. But since they do not have any incentive, since they are not losing anything, and there is no loss in it, so it's the incentive is also about both profit and loss. So here in case when they were packing rotten potatoes with the fresh one, they did not have any idea of loss, because the loss will be accrued by the state or the owner. And and even if they work hard, the profit, it will be appropriated by the owners. So both loss and profit, they will belong to the owners. And since they were not the owners, they do not have any incentive. So this is the whole idea behind ownership and incentives. Now let's talk about the second part of land reform, that is land ceiling. And it was employed to promote equity in agriculture sector, and it meant fixing the maximum size of land which could be owned by an individual. So the abolition of intermediaries, Jamindar and Jagirdar, it meant that some 200 lakh tenants that came into direct contact with the government, they were freed by the Jamindars, and the ownership that has been conferred on them, it gave them incentive to increase output and become the owner of both profit and losses. But since the earlier attempt at land reforms, they had many lacuna in them, loopholes in them. So such loopholes in legislation, they were exploited by the landlords and the jagirdars. There were many cases when tenants were evicted and landowners, they claimed to be self-cultivators, so that the land, it could come there under their direct control. And even when the tillers got ownership of land, the poorest of agricultural laborers, such as sharecropper, they did not benefit from it. And the land selling legislation, it also faced hurdles. It was challenging courts, so its implementation was delayed. And during this delay, the former owners, the intermediaries, they registered this land in the name of their relatives and neighbors, so that the land, it could not go to any other person. The land selling legislation, it had a lot of loopholes which were exploited by the big landholders to keep their tight grip at the land that was possessed by them. Land reforms were successful in Kerala and Bengal because of existence of communist rule there, or the prevalence of communist air in both parts. But other than these areas, land sealing or land reform, it had faced many such obstacles. Well, let's talk about Green Revolution. So at the time of independence, 75% of population it depended on agriculture, and productivity was also low because of use of old technology, absence of infrastructure, and dependence on monsoon. So to break this cycle of stagnation, Green Revolution was undertaken, and it refers to large increase in production of food grains from the use of high yielding varieties, HYV seeds, and the use of these seeds it required use of fertilizer, pesticide, and regular supply of water. So this process it was undertaken in the first place from mid 1960s to mid 1970s. The use of high yielding variety seeds it restricted to states of Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, these affluent states, and these were also the states where water irrigation supply was available. And further, the use of these seeds it primarily benefit the wheat growing regions only. Then came the second phase from mid 1970s to mid 1980s, and here the technology it is spread to a large number of states, and it also benefited many variety of crops. And by the end of mid 1970s, India achieved self-sufficiency in food, and we were no longer at mercy of any nation for the basic needs as basic as food. Then next concept is the portion of agriculture produce which is sold in market by farmer. It is known as marketed surplus. So it is the agriculture produce which after keeping some for his own personal consumption is left and is ready to enter the market. Suppose a farmer is he owns a land, a piece of land by which 200 kgs of wheat is grown. And now by his calculation, he knew that his family is going to need 80 kgs. So nearing it around the nearest figure. So he kept the 100 kgs for himself, and now the extra 100 kg out of 200 kg of his output, it is ready to enter the market. And this extra produce that will enter the market, it is known as marketed surplus. And as pointed out by famous economist C.H. Hanumantha, that a good proportion of the rice and wheat produced during the Green Revolution period it was available as marketed surplus and was sold by farmers in the market. And because of this, price of food grain it declined, and it benefited the lower income group because this is the group which spend large percentage of their income on food, and they got benefit from it. And the green revolution it also enabled the government to procure sufficient amount of food grain which could be stocked in time of shortage or any natural calamities. Then with the benefit or the um, perceived advantage of green revolution, it was also not free from risk. One such risk was that it would increase the disparity between small and big farmers, since the big farmers, they could afford the required input, they could make the investment in their own farms, they could ensure the availability of water and other such technologies. And also another factor was that the high yielding variety, they were more prone to attack by pests. So small farmers who may adopt this risk can lose anything, can lose everything under pest attack. So under the atmosphere of risk and fear, the government, it stepped in. So it provided loans at low interest rate to small farmers and subsidized fertilizer so that small farmers, they could be given the equal opportunity. Yes, the green revolution, it could have favored the rich farmer if the state did not play an extensive role to give equal opportunity to the small farmers. Now let's proceed on to the debate on subsidies. So it was generally agreed that the subsidies were necessary to provide an incentive for adoption of new technology. So both by big and small farmers. So subsidies during the initial time, it was needed to encourage farmers. It worked as incentive. Yes, and because of this, many farmers adopted it. And but when it served its purpose, it should have been phased out. And moreover, the subsidies which were there to benefit the small farmers, it ultimately ended up benefiting the fertilizer industry, which in itself became another lobbying factor. And the subsidy, they were largely cornered by the farmers in the more prosperous regions of Punjab and Tamil Nadu. So many argue that subsidies, this mechanism, it should be stopped here. There is no need to continue with it. On the other hand, some critics, they believe that government should continue with agriculture subsidies because farming in India, it is still a risky business. And if subsidies are eliminated, it will increase the inequality between rich and poor farmer, because elimination of subsidies which may be favoring the big farmers right now, this one may be giving more benefit to the large farmer than the smaller ones. But if eliminated, it is going to affect the small farmers in a negative way, since the large farmer, they will not feel the heat, they will not feel the effect anyway. So the correct policy is not to abolish subsidies but to take steps to ensure that only the poor farmer, only the small farmers, they enjoy the benefits of the subsidies. Now let's talk about the signaling mechanism of prices. So prices signal about the availability of goods. So if a good becomes scarce, its price will rise, and those who use this good will have the incentive to make efficient decision about its use based on its price. So the the scarcity of goods is a signal of prices and its use as well. So the example here is given about the usage of water. So if price of water goes up because of lower supply, then people will have the incentive to use it with greater care. And the same idea, it can be employed, or it can be overlapped upon many such natural resources. And many such resources, they are scarce, such as fossil fuels, oil, water, land, food. So all such resources, they are subjected to availability, and the availability itself, it is dependent upon many such factors, many such constraints. So when we talk about fossil fuels, we know that fossil fuels are extracted um, from underground oil wells, and since it took the organic material many millions of years to turn into fossil fuel, which we are consuming. And if we deplete the stock will not be replenished in a few years, and that make it subject to scarcity principle. In the same way, water. So even though the availability of water is abundant, most of the water here, it is not potable for use, since it is the ocean water, which upon which many filtration techniques need to be employed, which will make it more expensive in the near term. Then some economists also point out that subsidies, if we employ the principle of a scarcity or signaling mechanism of prices on subsidies other than oil, water, land, food, so the subsidies, it will not allow the price to indicate the supply of good, since price and supply both are interrelated. But if we are giving subsidies for, even if the reasons are good, and even if water and electricity are provided at a subsidized rate, they will not be used properly. So the first concern is their wasteful use, and it is likely, and it has been come to the notice that when water and electricity are given free or at a very subsidized rate, farmer will turn their attention to water intensive crops such as sugarcane, rice, and if you are not aware about such water intensive crops such as rice and cane sugar, so they need a lot of water. And if we go by the natural growing principle, so these crop, both of them, they naturally grow in region in which there is an abundant supply of fresh water. But since they also give profit, these are not edible crops, these are not food crop. Sugar and rice, it is a staple. So in both the cases, if in order to gain profit, if in order to gain much needed revenue, if the farmers from water scarce area, they resort to growing both the crops and any such water intensive crop, in that case the groundwater, it will be depleted at an unprecedented level. What will happen? There are two scenarios that are likely to come out. First, if you keep depleting the groundwater, ultimately you will not only drain the available fresh water, but the, the impurities such as metals or mineral impurities. You might have heard about fluoride or arsenic. So if you extract that much water from groundwater using tube well or any such irrigating mechanism, So there will be a time when we will extract it all that is available in the underground, available in the permeable rocks. These are the rocks where such water is stored. And having extracted everything that was contained in these rocks, we will go down further because grid will not stop anywhere. And then it is likely that we are contaminating the both groundwater and land water, contaminating both with the impurities that exist at further depth. So both the scenario are likely, and this will set up a vicious cycle. Vicious cycle in the sense that we we will still be needing the same constant supply of these water intensive crops, and in order to grow them we will further extract, we will further dig many tube wells, and those tube wells they will further contaminate the water, and those contamination they will further accumulate, bioaccumulate and biomagnify in the rice crop. Those rice crops will, those biomagnified and contaminated staple crops, they will need further treatment. So all in all, it, the whole cycle, it will become expensive, not just for our own health but also on our pockets. That is the idea behind the whole subsidy criticism. So in short, subsidies provide an incentive for wasteful use of resources. Then let's talk about the agricultural proportion. So the proportion of GDP that was contributed by agriculture in proportion to the population, it declined considerably between 1915 and 1990, the 40 years or the first 4 decades of our independence. Though the proportion of GDP that was contributed by agriculture, it declined significantly. But the population that is dependent on it, it does not. So here we are facing a strange, a peculiar situation in which if we see our economic growth, so it is not that commendable, but yes, we have improved ourselves, that the percentage of contribution of GDP by agriculture and allied activity, it declined. So its decline, it shows that agriculture, it is being used with, it is being done with a greater care, and the population that is dependent on it, it is shifting somewhere, maybe manufacturing and services sector. And the ideal way that we have talked about earlier is that any country in its course of development, it needs to go from agriculture to industrial sector. So the excess job, when excess workforce is removed from agriculture and allied activity, it will be absorbed by industrial sector. Even all such activities that are related to agriculture, such as food preparation, research and development, all such activity, they can also be generated and prospered if the uh, population dependent on agriculture, it, it can be absorbed. So initially it was believed by economists that the ideal way for a country to develop is to go from agriculture to industrial to service sector. So the usual graphical representation will be the percent of GDP, it needed to increase in this way from agriculture to service sector. And in the same way, the percentage of population that is dependent on it, it should also follow the same course, more or less. But in our Indian situation, the excess workforce it was not absorbed. So even if the proportion of GDP that was contributed by agriculture declined significantly. So if this decline is the decline in GDP contribution of agriculture, it is not a cause of concern. It just means that um, people are shifting away from agriculture to other activities. But it should also be followed by people actually shifting from agriculture work to other industrial or services work. But it did not happen. That the population that was dependent on agriculture in 1950 was 67%, and in 1990 it was 64%, and even right now it is still around 50%. So this is some kind of undisguised employment. In short, hidden unemployment, in which if there is a piece of land, say this is a piece of land, 1 hectare, and the productivity of this particular piece of land, it is 1 ton of agricultural produce. And now to make this exercise profitable or remunerative, or to make this exercise, this agricultural exercise sensible, we believe that the the actual output it should be handled by, or it should be done by those who can do it, or those who can actually make a contribution. So let's say this 1 ton of agricultural produce, it requires only 4%. So the manual labor of 4% is sufficient for 1 hectare of land. Even if the 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 agricultural produce, it can be some um, uh, cash crops or any such crop that need intensive care. Still, the labor of 4%, it is all in all sufficient that will make this whole endeavor sensible and remunerative. But what if the produce, it is still the 1 hectare, the land is, land is still 1 hectare and produce is still 1 ton, but instead of 4%, 8% are employed on it. So here 4%, the work of 4% can become sufficient, but now 8 persons are employed on it. So the rest of the 4%, their contribution is almost negligible. Since if more people are employed, then the produce it need to increase. So it should likely that if 8 people are employed, the output of this particular piece of land it should go to uh, 2 ton, twice the amount. If four person are producing 1 ton, then 8% need to produce 2 ton. But if 8% together they are also producing 1 ton, then there is some problem. There is an issue with the whole endeavor, and this is the peculiar situation India is facing right now. That the hidden employment it is glaringly available. So more people are still employed in agricultural activities, and the excess people that are working on any particular piece of land, they are not contributing to the output. So which makes the situation of hidden unemployment. So why was such a large proportion of population engaged in agriculture, although agricultural output could have grown with much less people working in the sector? The same example, if four people, they can produce 1 ton of output. If, then, if more people are working on it, the output should also increase. But because of land constraint and many such factors, the output it is not increasing. So the extra people that are working there, their contribution is nil. And the reason for which is the industrial sector and service sector, they did not absorb the people who are working in the agricultural sector. So even if they want to leave the job, they will not find employment everywhere, anywhere. There's a situation, that's why um, they keep working on the same farm even if the contribution is nothing. Then talk about industry and trade. So industry provide employment which is more stable than agriculture, and it also promotes modernization and overall prosperity. So let's see this chart. So agriculture by 1950 to 51, 72% people they were employed. Now by 1990, 66% people were still employed. So the overall difference in it was 5%. Then industry sector, it employed 10% people. By 1990, it employed 12.7. So it absorbed only 2% of people. And the services sector, it went from 17.2 in 1950 to 20. So it is almost 3% of absorption. So in order for agriculture to shed its extra workforce, if we want this number, uh, the proportion, let's say we want this in 2030, we want this proportion to decline drastically, let's say around 25%. So from 67% to 25%, it's a difference of around 42%. So this 42% people, they need to be absorbed by industry and service sector. So the percentage share of industry, it should go from 12.7 to around 30%. So by this way, it will absorb extra out of 42%. And then the service sector, it will go from 20.5%, and the remaining balance here, 42, 13, extra 18. So 18, it makes 24. So this percent share, it need to go this way. So this is how population structural composition should exist, and this is how the excess workforce need to be organized in order for making any economic activity sensible and remunerative. So earlier in industrial sector, the industry, they were largely confined to textile and jute, and there were other steel firms, one in Jamshedpur and other was in Kolkata. Then let's look at the issue of market and state in Indian industrial development. So the first question was, what should be the role of government and private sector in industrial development? So at the time of independence, Indian industrialists did not have the capital to undertake investment in industrial venture, even though the question was there that how should our country prosper in terms of industrial or manufacturing sector, and how both government and private sector need to work in tandem in order to develop industries. So initially, industrialists in India, in the independent India, they did not have the investment to make and to invest in any industrial venture. And the other thing, nor was the market big enough to encourage industrialists. It was because people were also poor. So market will develop only when people have the purchasing parity or people have the purchasing capacity. And since India was already reeling with bouts of famines and droughts, scarcity, so industrialists could not believe that the people could have the, the capacity to buy their products. So this was a discouragement for industrialists to undertake any such major project. And for these reasons, the state government had to play a larger role. And the decision to develop Indian economy or socialist line, it also led the policy of state controlling the commanding heights of economy. So first, this reason, second, lack of market, and third, socialist principle. All because of all three reasons, state or the government, it controlled major sectors of economy. Then let's talk about Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956. So this resolution, it formed the basis of second five-year plan, and the plan which tried to build the basis for socialist pattern of society. So industry were categorized into three categories. First categories were those industry that could be exclusively owned by the state. The second category consisted of those industry in which private sector could supplement the efforts of the state. So it was more like uh, a combined joint effort in which the state was going to play a leading role, and the role of private sector, it would be supplementary. And the third category would be those in which the private sector were given free hand. And at the time, still there were some industry that were left to the private sector, in which the private sector was given free hand, but it was not without any constraint or without any control. The system was still controlled through a system of licenses. And this system of license, it was a policy that was used for promoting industry in backward regions. So if by controlling the license, the nationalist leader or government at that time, they could divert many such industrial ventures into backward regions. And in addition, such units were given certain concessions such as tax benefit, electricity at lower tariff, and the purpose of this policy, it was to promote regional inequality, because industry industrial activity or capitalism, it will it will definitely go to the area which um, where it can smell profit, where it can see profit. But if capitalism in this way is given a free hand, it will it will create a regional inequality or regional disequilibrium, because those regions such as fertile land or mineral rich area, both this fertile land and mineral rich area, so both are fresh targets for any industrialist to venture out. And this is likely. They know that these are the area where cost can be reduced, where market can be produced, and where their whole effort can produce profit, can bring profit. But to shift their industry, which is neither fertile nor mineral rich, in short, in a backward region, it could be handled by a government policy only, because industrialists on their own, they are not going to cater to, not going to address this regional or social disequilibrium situation. It was not uh, their prerogative. It was not their idea or their task to think about people in general. So the state, it did try to start this policy of license so that some ventures could stray out into such backward regions, and that it policy with giving tax benefits, lower electricity, same as the SEZ, Special Economic Zone, we see these days. So this regional equality policy, it was promoted. So even an existing industry had to obtain a license for expanding output or diversify production. You may need to remember this one, mm, both for prelims and mains. So other license that was required for expanding or diversify production, and this was meant to ensure that the quantity that was produced, it was not more than what the economy required. So some hint of the Soviet planning, the Soviet socialism was also there. Then let's talk about the small scale industry. In 1955, the Village and Small Scale Industries Committee, called the Carvey Committee, it noted the possibility of using small scale industry for promoting rural development. The finding of the Carvey Committee was based on the exclusive self-reliant economy that existed before the arrival of Europeans. So self-reliant and village cottage industry was there before the arrival of the British, the European powers, and it existed in a prosperous manner during both Sultanate and Mughal times. So the idea was here in the earlier cottage industry was that people were living a very simple life. Simple life in the sense, for the whole year, India had two monsoons. So 8 months of monsoons were there. 8 months of rain, both from southwest and northeast monsoon, especially the peninsula and the middle northern plains. And other than that, the other, there was no technological advancements. Transportation was done on bullock carts and horse carts. Electricity, other irrigation facilities, infrastructure, it was not available. So there wasn't any need for education, and even if the education was there, it was not on scientific line. It were semi-religious and social education. On social level, people could people were most of the people were married very early. So the average age of marriage was around 13 14 for boys and around 10 for girls. It was the average age at that time. So you can see here, if you see whole all these points in one place and try to imagine what the situation would have been at that time, you will get an idea that if people were living in this simple state, in this primitive state, they must have resorted to some economic activity to go by their day. since nothing was there, no electricity, no infrastructure, no education and health facilities, and people could be married at very early age. And why would they not marry at early age? um, it was a mechanism at that time because infrastructure, health facilities were not there, and infant mortality was very high. So it was it was a natural mechanism for them to cope up with the infant mortality scenario, because both infant mortality it was high and life expectancy it was very low. Nobody know when they are going to die. So crossing 40, 50 was considered a commendable feat because people could not have lived that far. Average life expectancy was around 35 to 38 years. So in order to cope up with this, both this natural scenario, early marriage was an option, because by the time, if the couple it is going to reproduce by just after the onset of puberty. So in that scenario, bride and groom, maybe let's say bride is 13 years old and groom is 15 years old. Now they reproduce their first child when they are 16 and 14. And this producing of child, it was continued. First, medical facilities were not there, and second, they did not know which of their child is going to survive. So usually it was a common scenario for couple to produce around or to have around 9, 10 children, because they did not know how many of them are going to survive by then. So this was the social situation other than the economic life of people. So when you see all the background that was mentioned here, and above all, you hover over an economic scenario. It was like this way. Every household worked in two ways. First, it was their house, and it was the agricultural land that they worked upon. Now, for 6 to 7 months, they were employed in their own farm or their other farm. Since private property was almost absent, so they were working um, on the farms of intermediaries such as jamindars and jagidars. And then each of the households, since 6, 7 months were already could be employed in agricultural activities, uh, since irrigation facilities were not there, so most of them they depended on rain. Then the rest of the months they worked somewhere, which was their own household industry. So every house it had some of its own industry, and when you see the occupational structure of caste system that prevailed that time, caste system, you will find that the during the ancient time or during the medieval time as well, the caste system and its occupational structure, it was kept the way it was, which means it was immobile and rigid. So if you are born a cobbler, you are going to make shoes for your whole life. If you are born a farmer, you are going to resort to farming activities. And in the same way, if you are born a blacksmith, So this is what is going to be your lifelong occupation, and which could not be changed. So this was the rigidity of caste system and its occupational structure that was questioned later on. But before before the coming of Europeans, this was the situation. So everybody had some work, and there was also Jajmani system of caste system that prevailed that time. So according to this system, in every village, the Brahmin it served as the center of all economic activity. So he used to perform all the yajna, all the educational activities, all puja rituals. So this was his task, and he was assisted by the the works of all individual caste members. So let's say a cobbler, he would provide him with shoes, and in return, the Brahmin, he may provide him with kind or any such work. And then another work, the blacksmith, he may provide the Brahmin with the tools that he needed in his house, and in return, Brahmin will provide him with uh, either kind or agriculture produce or service exchanges. So this was the system of service exchange that prevailed that time, and it also the system also it it kept the village cottage industry intact, since if each of them, even if it was mandated by caste system to work with the occupation they had inherited, they kept doing it. So village cotton industry it worked in this way. Every household it had something for their own. So cobbler has the shoemaking work. Blacksmith had the uh, tool making work. In the same way, many such individual work according to their caste it prevails, such as oil miller. So it was his hereditary occupation to mill oil, and same way milkman it was his ancestral work to sell milk, and people usually, because of mandate of caste system, they usually kept going with it. Well, this is the overview of or the background which led the Carve committee to give the possibility of using small scale industry to promote rural development. And small scale industry it is defined with reference to maximum investment that is allowed. So the definition it has changed over time. In 1950, a small industrial unit was one which invested maximum of rupees 5 lakh, and at present this limit it has been increased to 1 crore. And it was also believed that the small scale industry that are more labor intensive, so they use more labor than large scale industry, so they generate more employment and excess of workforce could be employed there. And it was obvious that development of small scale industry required them to be shielded from the large firm, since they the unit of production it is small, and the products that are being made by small scale industries that will not compete against the product that were made by large industries or big industrial firms. They needed to be shielded. So for this purpose, state reserve a small scale of certain products for small scale industries. And let's talk about the industrial uh, trade policy which employed during the first few 5-year plans. So the idea was import substitution. So In the first seven plan, trade was characterized by inward-looking trade strategy. So inward-looking, it means that we were just freed ourselves from the jaws of colonial empire, and we are not in any way going to destroy ourselves, or we are not in any way going to get entrapped again. And especially in trade matter, it was possible since when we imported food grain from USA. So it was not only humiliating, it was also an eye opener. Eye opener in the sense that it it shown our real situation at that time, and it also exposed the folly. It also exposed the fallacy that was mm, that prevailed that time, which was that the international arena, it is like wilderness in which you can be you can be preyed upon, you can be hunted, you can easily fall a prey to any big imperial power. So you must develop your own industry, you must be self-reliant in agricultural produce. Only then you can talk about militarily or in other way protecting your own borders, you're protecting your sovereignty. So this inward-looking strategy, it was to look at your home or tend your home first. So we needed the industry to develop itself, and it was also needed to shield it from the foreign competition. So technically this strategy, it is known as import substitution, inward looking trade strategy, or tend your home first, whichever way you understand it better. So this policy, it aims at replacing or substituting imports with domestic production, which means all all such products that can be made in our country should be made here. They should not be imported. Uh, so in this policy, the government protected the domestic industry from foreign competition. So this protection, it took two forms: tariffs and quotas. So tariffs are tax on imported goods. So if you are importing something, if trader is importing something for which there is demand in market, but if government put a tax on it, this will make the product, imported good, expensive, and because of its priciness, it, its use will be discouraged. And then quota, this quota specify the quantity of goods which can be imported. So both of these measures of under policy of import substitution were undertaken to protect our own industry, to tend our own home. The policy of protection, it is based on notion that industry of developing countries are not in a position to compete against the goods that are produced by more developed economies. So, and planners, they also fear the possibility of foreign exchange being spent on import of luxury goods. Then comes the effect of policies on industrial development. First, the proportion of GDP contributed by the industrial sector, it increased 11.8% to 24.6%. So it was a commendable increase. Then the 6% annual growth rate of the industrial sector was commendable, and no longer that we were restricted to cotton and jute. Our industry, it got diversified by 1990. Diversification means um, the industry were developed in all sectors in which there were demands. Then the promotion of small scale industry gave opportunity to those people who did not have the capital to start large firm. and protection from foreign competition. It enabled the development of indigenous industry in areas of electronics and automobile sector, such as the you might have heard about Rajdoot and Ambassador. The Ambassador car, it was developed on uh, developed indigenously by Indian themselves. Then the motorbike Rajdoot, it was also an indigenous endeavor. Then came the Maruti. It was also an indigenous automobile sector. Then it is now widely held that state enterprises continue to produce certain goods and services which was no longer required. So then we are proceeding on to the criticism part. So in the earlier session or in the beginning, just after the independence, we we needed to resort to all these policy of protection of domestic industries or protection of indigenous industry, import substitution, tariffs and quotas, and state controlling the commanding heights of economy. So it was necessary that time during the first 5 year plans. So initially 5 decades you can say. So initially it was needed, but when this purpose was served, so the state enterprises they needed to be phased out, and the issue was that the state it continued to produce many such goods and services and often monopolizing them even though they were not required. So the enterprise that is being questioned here it is BSNL and MTNL. So both these services were at first they were started by the state so that telecommunication it could be provided to people whoever can afford them and wherever it is necessary. But then when private sector were afforded their entry into it, such such enterprises they were no longer considered necessary, and it was before the entry of private players. So it was assumed that after 5 decades of uh, protection growth, it was assumed that the state it should shed its role from control over many such economic enterprises. State may shift its role in regulation and legislation and execution, but and in terms of economic activity, in terms of generating profit and enterprising or entrepreneurship, those will be in the domain of private sector, or those will be in domain of entrepreneurs. The state has a different domain to work upon. So this telecommunication service, government had the monopoly it even after private sector firms could provide it. So the issue first that was raised is that private sector firm or private entity enterprise it can provide many such services that were provided by state. So state had to shed its role, state had to loosen it up and focus itself or divert itself to its core domain or core area. Then there are many such examples are given here, such as modern bread. So it was a bread manufacturing firm that was provided by the government. So right, we know that private sector can can at least provide manufactured bread. So the whole idea is there at the time. No distinction was made between what the public sector alone can do and what the private sector can also do. So here even now, only the public sector can supply defense and free medical treatment for poor patients. So this is the area where state is necessary because private sector are not going to provide free medical treatment. and private sector, it cannot be um, trusted, cannot be completely blindly trusted on defense matters. Other than that, private sector can manage the rest of the things, such as private sector can manage hotels, but government are also running them, such as you might have heard about RTDCs. So these are government-run hotels or government-run lodges, and it is just a burden on exchequer. Private sector can provide them. So the argument here is the state it should get out of the area which private sector can manage, and government should concentrate its resources on important services which private sector cannot provide by incapacity or by its um, own general idea. General idea here is about private sector that it is not going to cater to the backward regions. It is not going to cater to the poor people. It is not providing free free medical treatment. It is not looking into all the social dimension. It will only concentrate itself to the production and distribution of things that are in demand. So the rest of the area that are in social, legislative, execution business that need to be addressed by the state. So the state should concentrate its role where it is necessary. Then many public sector firms they incurred huge losses but continued to function because it was impossible to close a government undertaking. Even if the losses, it was a drain on country's natural resources. The idea here is that it is not that private firms are always profitable, but a loss-making private firm will not keep running itself. If it is making losses, it will either close up or it will be merged in, it will be sold or will be merged with some other entity. But it will not keep on going, it will not keep on draining the resources. So during the initial time, they were nationalized. During the initial 5 decades or 4 decades, it was necessary. But then, when the purpose having been served, government undertakings are at time in if we excuse a few such industry where it is necessary, such as running of private hospital in backward regions, the defense and national security, uh, international foreign diplomacy, the internal governance, internal security. So all these domains that cannot be given to private sector. But other than that, uh, private sector, all the other activities, all the government work, it should be given to private sector. Yes, regulations can be there. Government can shift its work from actually handling those enterprises to regulating those enterprises. Then the need to obtain a license to start an industry was also misused by industrial houses. Let's see how. So a big industrialist would get a license not for starting a new firm. He will not start a new firm by himself, but he will buy the license anyhow so that other competitors will could be prevented from starting their own firms. Then this misuse it was called the license Raj, uh, because this system it was misused in such a way that new industries which could have grown, which could have been established, were actually prevented from becoming efficient. Then the protection from foreign competition is also being criticized. So due to restriction on imports, the Indian consumer had to purchase whatever the Indian producers produced. And the indigenous producers, they were aware that they had a captive market. So captive market is one in which anything any producer will be bought, will be sold. So in such captive market, when in which the producers, the industries knew that their product, however of inferior quality, will be sold. So it, because of this reason, they did not have any incentive to improve the quality of their goods. So nevertheless, scholars pointed out that public sector is not meant for earning profit but to promote the welfare of nation. Yes, the public sector firms should be evaluated on the basis of extent to which they contribute to welfare of people and not the profit they earn. It is a counter argument of um, plucking the state out of any all such industrial activities. So the counter argument is here is that the profitability profitability can be judged if a private sector is working on it. But if a public sector firm is there, if a state is working, if a state is holding a particular economic activity, so it should not be judged on the basis of profit it had made. It should be judged on the contribution it had made to the welfare of people. Then comes the conclusion. The progress of the Indian economy during first seven plans were impressive. Our industry, they got diversified. We became self-sufficient in food production thanks to green revolution, land reforms in form of abolition of zamindari and land ceiling. Yes, it it also proved, it also had its say. Then excess government regulation, it prevented growth of entrepreneurship. Uh, the excess regulation here is, or misuse government regulation is about both the state undertaking economic activity and the license raj, both. Then in the name of self-reliance, our producers were protected against foreign competition, and it did not serve the likely purpose. So they were protected. The idea was that if they were protected, they would be shielded from foreign competition and they would certainly improve the quality of their goods so that they could be competed against the foreign market in the future. But because of their protection, it failed to give any incentive to improve the quality. So this inward oriented or tending our own home, it failed to develop a strong export sector. Then new economic policy, it was initiated in 1991 to make the economy more efficient, and here LPG sector, the new economic policy, we will talk about in next chapter. In recap, so after independence, India envisaged an economic system which combined best features of both socialism and capitalism. We started with 5-year plans. The, the fundamental goals were growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. The major policy initiative in agricultural sector were land reform and green revolution, and they helped to become self-sufficient in food production. Then the proportion of people depending on agriculture did not decline, and although one of the major drawbacks in industrial sector was inefficient functioning in public sector, it is incurring started incurring losses despite draining India's natural resources. So that's it. Thank you very much and kindly subscribe my channel.